Welcome to Voices of the Dream. In this episode, we will be talking to Lady Grace Ambrosia Corwin. Lady Corwin, would you please introduce yourself?
Greetings, hail and well met. I am Lady Grace Ambrosia Corwin, a very minor noble from the Outer Hebrides of northernmost Scotland in the Barony of Loch Salann in the Kingdom of Artemisia. It has been my honor until just a few weeks ago to serve as the baronial fencing champion for the Barony of 1000 Eyes. I currently serve as the Arts and Sciences champion to the Shire of Windgate. I am the premier bardic champion of the annual Huntsman's Ball event in the Shire of River Serpent. I am the baronial archery champion and captain of archers for the Barony of Loch Salann, the baronial bardic champion to the Barony of Arnhold, and the originator of the Kingdom cocktail of all Artemisia. By royal decree, I am an armiger of Artemisia, as well as a pillar of Artemisia and a member of the Order of the Golden Griffin's Heart. By the will of my baronage, I am a member of the Order of the Crystal of the Salt Wastes, the Order of the White Goose, and the Order of the Crystal Heart. My name appears on the list of grace, and I bear a woodsman's black archery tassel.
Thank you. So go ahead and tell us a story of your persona. This is something I've known you for a little while, and I definitely would like to hear.
It was the year of our Lord 1599 at Westminster Abbey in the town of Westminster, not far from London. To be sure, it was the same year in all other places that count years after the Gregorian manner, but so it also was at Westminster Abbey as well. At the time, Lady Grace Ambrosia Corwin had spent half of her life at Westminster, having been sent there as soon as she was old enough to have received primary education from tutors at home in Scotland. This is, and has been for generations, a common practice in violent times and places to ensconce the second-born spare heir, as they were called, somewhere safe, such as a monastery or an abbey. If the heir apparent did indeed inherit, then the second child could not assert any claim, having entered the clergy. But in case of tragedy, the spare heir could be released from their vows and return home to take over the estate. Grace's mother, Lady Annalee Geldfenning Corwin, died in childbirth. "Only by the grace of God have we now an heir and a spare," said she to her husband. Her last words were, "Boy or girl, you will name the child Grace, Ambrosius," and then she was gone. Lord Ambrosius Corwin could not help but smile, even in his grief, for of course Grace is the English translation of his wife's German name, Annalee. Anna is derived from the first syllable of the word Anmut, German for the noun Grace, and Lee is derived from the first syllable of the word Liebchen, meaning beloved little one. So Annalee fully translates as beloved little Gracie. And so baby Grace, the spare heir to the Corwin farm in the Outer Hebrides of northernmost rural Scotland, carried on the name of the lady of the estate, and, after a fashion, as Ambrosius had intended to name the child after himself, thus was the child given the middle name Ambrosia. In 1597, Ambrosius and his son and heir Genericus lost their lives fighting in the resistance against the incursion of James VI, who sought to colonize the Isle of Lewis, where they dwelt. Many lives were lost in that struggle, and a goodly number of houses, noble but of too low a rank to escape, having their menfolk involved in the fighting, became obligated to retrieve second sons and other spare heirs who had been ensconced in an abbey or the hallowed halls of academia. Thus Grace returned in haste from Westminster Abbey, having recently entered the clergy and then been released from service to the church, as had been the agreement with the Corwin family, should something happen to the father and the elder heir. The education received at Westminster in letters, languages, numbers, history, natural sciences, and other topics served well enough for one who would have to manage the estate. But the Renaissance ideals at the time required Grace, as the sole Corwin at court, to very quickly acquire new skills such as courtly graces and service, heraldic pursuits and blazonry, fencing, armored fighting, which was passing out of style but still not unheard of at war, archery and fusilieri, primitive firearms, music, dance, chess, and other arts and sciences as well. Grace set about all these tasks with surprising gusto, making a name for herself not only as a Renaissance polymath in general, but also in particular as an up-and-coming fencer and competitive archer and a sought-after herald at court. Before too long, Grace was made Lady Grace, Armiger of Artemisia, a friend nation and close ally of Grace's native Hebrides, along with various fine accolades from the local barony of Loch Salann as well. All this was well and good, and yet Grace wanted more. It is one thing to learn how to fight. It is another thing entirely to be able to fight and make a name for oneself at war. And yet, while there certainly was fighting to do in that place and at that time, it lacked the certain characterization of professional violence that might bring one good fame or any fortune at all. One could, for example, fight on behalf of the British, suppressing the Irish, or one could fight for the British, suppressing the Highlands, or one could fight for the British anywhere else in the globe. But none of these options paid well, and none provided much opportunity, if any, for advancement. While the era of widespread fortune-seeking among the Landsknecht companies was indisputably on the decline, it had not yet entirely ended. Grace gathered equipment, provisions, weapons, a horse, and a pack mule, straining the financial means of the estate, and set out for the Rhinelands, promising to return with wealth and maybe also fame and glory for the Corwin name. Grace's very bad German and perfectly fine arquebus, combined with a willingness to fight on the very front line for double pay, overcame some initial hesitation on the part of the fighting company to permit the enlistment of a foreigner. A lesson was very quickly learned about why some fighters wore such oddly asymmetrical trousers, as first one leg, then the other, took great wounds, soaking each trouser leg with blood and requiring them to be shorn off. But surviving such wounds and continuing to fight, wearing the very same abbreviated trousers, made for an immediately apparent and indisputable right to boast of great deeds. Grace did indeed establish some degree of personal renown, and was recognized and greeted even by strangers far from home. Despite the expense, Grace did in fact replace the battle-torn shorts with a new pair of elaborate trousers in her kingdom's colors, for propriety's sake at court if nothing else, but also found the old pair to be quite handy and comfortable, having no legs as they did, especially when agility and fast footwork might be needed. And needed they were, for Lady Grace had established some fame and hoarded a small fortune, but was not quite ready to return home. All that was missing was some kind of item of luxury, even more heinously expensive than the Landsknecht garb itself, by which an ostentatious display of wealth might be made. So Grace found passage aboard the Dutch trading vessel Liefde as a skilled fighter charged with the personal protection of Captain Jacob Quakernake, correctly guessing that the ship would sail to places where baubles could be had for the small fortune Grace had available, such as would have cost a large fortune back in the Hebrides if they could be had at all. Grace's short trousers soon begot the nickname Beaujam, handsome legs, but indisputably lent a certain deadly efficiency when fighting or practicing arms on deck. The Liefde eventually made land in Japan, where both Captain Quakernake and his English pilot Williams learned Japanese and, in fact, became the first Western samurai. Now, as we know at that time, the Japanese were a very xenophobic culture. Why on earth was this honor permitted to two such strange Western barbarians? For between them stood somebody obviously of means and rank, elaborate clothing, a firearm far more advanced than anything Japan could possibly produce, and this person served as the bodyguard for these two men. A stunning display of status, immediately respected by their Japanese hosts, and the only explanation why those two were allowed to take up such training and achieve such status at all. Now, Grace did not have the liberty to undertake such training while serving as the captain's bodyguard, and in fact assisting with his rise in the local social hierarchy of rank, as we discussed. But for this yeoman service, Captain Quakernake interceded with the shogun and requested a boon, that Grace might be permitted to purchase a set of katana, wakizashi, and tanto, and accorded permission to bear those arms as a mark of distinguished service and noble, if foreign, rank. So it was that Grace was able to acquire a set of blades from Japan's Shinto era, other examples of which had indeed also made their way into the West, where they were among the most prized of ostentatious displays of wealth for any who could afford to pay a truly ruinous price for such a rare and stunningly beautiful set of weapons. A lucky bargain indeed for the noble bodyguard. Sadly, Grace was not accorded sufficient time off to study proper kenjutsu, and thus acquired the distinctly odd habit of wielding katana in one hand and wakizashi in the other, in the fashion of Western cut-and-thrust saber fighters. This brings us to the present day in the very early 16-somethings, and the Leaf has returned to the West. Lady Grace is well pleased to be at home and looks forward to fighting with katana and wakizashi at the semi-annual cut-and-thrust tournament in Artemisia.
Thank you very much for your story. That was very fascinating and tells us a little bit about how some of the things we see in Artemisia. So I love it. I love how that mixes. So thank you once again for gracing us with your story. We appreciate it. And until we find another opportunity to talk again, thank you. This is Voices from the Dream.